Hi everyone, my name is Roseline Orwa, founder and director of the Rona Foundation, a widow human rights organization that champions and advances widow rights in Kenya, particularly working with rural widows in Western Kenya, in Siaya County. I am a widow myself, and when we are talking about climate change and the crisis, the impact of climate change on the life of rural women, and asking what's gender got to do with it. I believe gender has got everything to do with it. Let me tell you a story, two recent stories in the context of my work. Just about 2 weeks ago, as COP27 was going on, there was media news in Kenya that two children caught a chameleon, slaughtered the chameleon, roasted it and ate it because their widowed mother had nothing to cook for them and they looked for something to eat. I think eating wild animals of some characters and like chameleons is an abomination of sorts in the context of how rural life where I grew up. So that is what children resort to. But what might their mother have gone through? Perhaps the stigma that will follow their mother, that her children ate chameleons because of hunger and starvation and inflation, and likely the fact that traditional crops are no longer doing well. Because I grew up eating cassavas. I grew up, my mother making porridge out of millet. Those crops no longer, you can't have bumper harvest out of those crops. So climate change has everything to do with the gender violence and particularly livelihoods, sexual reproductive health. I work with widows where when inflation goes up like it is now and the food prices are over the roof, our government is currently considering importing GMO foods. And so what do you really budget on? Do you budget on reproductive health services, or you put your little money on buying whatever food you can lay your hands on, even if that food becomes unhealthy for you? And in the case of those children, eating wild animals, and their widowed mother perhaps struggling for days without knowing what to do and cook for her children. The other incident case study that I want to bring here in my real context and where I live and work is on Lake Victoria. The mass death of fish on Lake Victoria. Just recently, millions and millions of cage farmers, some of them widows who had received funding to put investments of cage fishing on Lake Victoria. Now these women, when the mass death, and as a result, scientists said that there was low oxygen, Lake Victoria contaminated, all manner of scientific explanation. And these women put their investments with perhaps very little technological support, and all that is gone in a flash. So what happens to women when they suddenly have huge losses of their livelihoods and investments that ordinarily don't even exist for rural women? In those two cases, that is the extreme cases of climate change crisis and how it affects women in unseen ways. Maybe I would add by saying, what have I seen? I have seen rural women walk far distances to collect firewood, look for charcoal and cut trees that trees don't even exist. Their children toil for hours looking for firewood. I have seen, and I visited a village called Loara, just around around 6 kilometers from Bondo town, and the well there was dry. Animals were dying. I visited Kiserian, the Maasai land, and I saw with my own eyes at a school where children are turning up at 5 hours later in school because they were lifting animals that were falling down because of drought and because there's no water and there's no pasture. So the whole effect is about women and children. And then what do women cook? We are used to foraging. I foraged as a young girl growing up in my rural village, and we have all these edible vegetables. So when drought comes and the whole place is dry up, Where do women turn to? I have seen Lake Victoria breaking its banks. I myself losing about 7 meters of land at the Rona Center. What happens to those women that had their businesses on the banks of Lake Victoria and their kiosks cut off and they are swept away? Investments that some by the lake basin, buildings now right inside the lake. What happens to those women, even if it was your home right on the lake? In my case, losing 7 meters, if my house was next to the banks of the lake and it went, what happens to me? Are there emergency support systems or funds that such women and widows in particular? Because when you are a widow, you are vulnerable because a husband is a layer of protection, and without whom discrimination, disinheritance, stigma. What happens to you when such impacts of climate change happen suddenly? Are there even alert groups that would warn you that the rains are becoming heavy, winds are coming to blow your roof, Lake Victoria is moving, your home will be swept away? What happens to such women? So climate change crisis is the real linkage to gender-based violence, sexual reproductive health and rights and services, and livelihoods of rural women. I have also seen the loss of incomes equates to loss of agency and loss of self-efficacy. When you don't have an income, then you don't have food on the table. Then you become more vulnerable. Then you cannot even negotiate for yourself, especially for widowed women who are also living with other burdens of raising orphans, burdens of living with a virus, HIV in most cases, and through another virus, COVID-19. And here again, dealing with the impact of climate change crisis. So when you lose income, and when inflation goes up the roof and drought is here, your joy is unseen. One cannot tell where that will come from. So I've seen all these cases. And I've also seen the resilience of widows, how they are surviving all the double burdens, all the harmful traditional practices, all the climate change crisis after crisis. In my area, almost about 20 minutes from where our facility sits, there was the mining area, artisanal mining, where widowed women lost their sons because of the collapse of the mines. And I still saw women turning up in those mines to still look for an income, barely etching, sweeping the ground to even make $1 a day. I have seen, sadly, what I have seen, Yvonne, that is very amusing lately, especially when you posted the media awareness for this webinar. I have seen social media rejecting that gender-based violence and climate change are not interlinked. And sometimes I reason with myself, maybe it's just that they don't see how. Maybe they can't see how these are interlinked. Just the other day, and lastly, what have I seen? The last one. Just the other day, Central Bank of Kenya issued a report that the male youth, particularly in the context of my county, Siaya County, have embraced gambling. And gambling has become a serious resource, their money-earning activity. And so I'm left with the questions, and I'm issuing an opinion piece next week where I'm asking, and I spoke to a number of widows who are saying, we mourn our sons, we mourn our children, we mourn our male sons, who, because of lack of opportunity, depleted environmental conditions, Lake Victoria getting perished. One of the widows in our intergenerational dialogue forum spoke of her son coming back with only one fish. The lake has broke its banks. The lake is now perished. That is the main source of income in our area. And so how many things can a widow mourn? She mourns her husband. She mourns the economic situation. She makes no $1 a week. She's burdened by orphan care, maybe elderly care. And now she's handling the big giant of our time, environmental challenges and the impact of climate change. And so, and then now here are your male sons, and men are known to be providers, have become gamblers. So the burden on the female head, who in this case is a widow in where I work in my context, is so huge that everything about climate change is about her. What have I heard? Maybe perhaps even I should say what I have not heard. I have not heard about the inclusion of widows in climate change conversation. Myself, as a widow rights champion of 13 years going forward, this is the second climate change conversation that I'm joining. So maybe it's what other measures can be taken to have more widows included in such conversations. I have also the exclusivity of climate change conversations, I think, is also is what I have also heard about, because for some reason I think it's been known to women are not part of it, yet women are at the center of it. I have not heard about climate change investments, especially targeting rural women, targeting marginalized women in the context of food security, nutrition and security, in terms of livelihood, in terms of economic empowerment, and in terms of even gender-based violence and rights, so that women can also exercise bodily autonomy. Women can exercise self-efficacy and collective efficacy. Women can become their own agents and strengthen their relations and change, because women also don't own land. Widows don't own land. And therefore, when we are talking about climate change, if tree planting is the avenue of mitigating climate, the impact of climate change, and yet I can use the land, maybe I can't even access it and I can't own it, then women also should be able to, we should be talk about property, assets. What makes women not even plant trees in their gardens that they till or in their homesteads where they live? Because about ownership of property and land here is a key issue. So as I close, maybe is it for rural widows, is it adapt and starve? Because mostly widows, the vulnerability levels are also high, but I also believe that the resilience is also very high, because these women are the ones holding society together. The last tier of fighting HIV and AIDS and COVID-19 pandemic are these women in more or less what I call graveyard homesteads. And so if we, besides looking at who is not on the table, can we also discuss the resilience of widows as a strength and their numbers to mitigating climate change crisis, and also investing in them for adaptation, resilient crops, adaptive seeds, instruments of climate change in terms of finance, resources and knowledge, and networks that can able to support them to also build back and help intervene in the climate change crisis and build back post-COVID-19. So what can we do? In the context of Siaya County, I would discuss what Rona Foundation is doing. We are implementing a pilot project dubbed Plant and Play through primary schools, 5 primary schools, where we're bringing young children to play sports as we ask them to plant trees and do climate change conversations. What do trees means? What does taking care of your own tree as you grow up mean? When you plant one as a woodlot in school, could you also plant some fruit trees at home? Could you also help your mother build a kitchen garden, even if it is vegetable in a sack, if you don't have a piece of land? And in the village, we are blessed to have the land. So these are not difficult conversation, especially changing it, the attitude and behavior about environment for young children in primary schools. So we are supported in that program by UEFA through another organization called Wildlife for Water, and they are based here in Kenya and partly in the Netherlands, and they're supporting us to implement that, pilot that project. We are also training widows as energy-saving jiko builders, stoves builders, through GIZ, a German non-profit working here in Kenya. And why? Because cutting of trees, because that's the source of firewood here, is huge. And so we are training them, as we've trained 30 widows as builders, and them, they are going to the communities to build energy saving stoves for other households, both widows and married single, so that if an energy saving stove can use one firewood, then we reduce the effect of cutting down trees to a certain percentage. We are also establishing disaster alert groups, especially around mining areas, around the lake region, and around risk zones. And particularly, there are a number of widows that are in our emergency program for Build a House for a Widow, because the wind came and lifted off their roofs. So in that regard, as Rona, we are also fighting to set an emergency fund that can be able to respond to disaster and climate change disaster on the go. We are recommending a study, especially around the artisanal mining areas where mercury is used, where chemicals are used, where land is so ravaged by building this deep, mines are deep and they are left there when mines are closed, and then people move on, another gold mine has come up somewhere, and also working with landowners around the mine areas to also mitigate by planting trees and change attitude and behavior on land management and what happens around the mining areas. Lastly, we are also working with the county government, our county government of Siaya, to increase the tree cover and forest cover in Siaya County. And in particular, we have adapted one hill called Mbaga Hills. And these hills, people have penetrated the hill and the forest, cut trees. On the outside, it looks like the trees are standing, but on the inside, people are burning charcoal, and we are changing attitude and behavior. We are also working with the communities around there to form committees to manage the forest. And so we are taking our little steps as a widow human rights organization and using our widow networks to also mitigate climate change and attain climate justice. So with that, I would say that our work at Rona Foundation, though we are a small grassroots organization in Western Kenya, but we have a large network of widows, around over 10,000 widows. We serve about 150 children daily. We work with male champions over 300, and a network of widow chapters in the country and in our particular country, other CSOs. So we see ourselves as a platform for innovation. We see ourselves as a platform for research. We also see ourselves as a tool and a development partner that would partner with other organizations to mitigate climate change and also implement impactful and transformative programs. So thank you so much for having me, and I have enjoyed participating in the climate change conversations. I want to thank you, and you can follow our work at Rona Foundation. Yvonne, thank you so much, and God bless.